The salt air hung heavy over the Naval Special Warfare Command as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped out of the black sedan that had brought her from Coronado. Her combat boots clicked against the concrete as she made her way toward the briefing room, carrying only a thin manila folder and the weight of uncertainty on her shoulders. The message had come at 0400 hours. Report immediately for classified assignment. No details, no preparation time, just orders that cut through her sleep like a blade. Sarah had been with Naval Intelligence for 8 years, specializing in linguistic analysis and cultural integration protocols. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had served in advisory roles across 3 continents, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what waited behind the steel doors of Building 147. The briefing room buzzed with tension when she entered. 12 men sat around an oval table, each one bearing the distinctive trident pin of the Navy SEALs. Their faces were weathered maps of countless operations, eyes that had seen things civilians couldn't imagine. At the head of the table sat Commander Jack Morrison, whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. Morrison had led more successful operations than any active SEAL commander, and his teams trusted him with their lives because he'd never given them reason not to. Morrison looked up as Sarah entered, his gray eyes assessing her with the same intensity he might use to evaluate enemy positions. The room fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and she felt the weight of their skepticism like a physical force. "Gentlemen," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in special operations, "meet Lieutenant Chen. She'll be joining us for Operation Silent Thunder." The silence that followed was profound. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez, an explosives expert whose arms bore scars from 3 tours in Afghanistan, was the first to speak. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a direct action mission. We've trained as a team for months. Integration at this stage could compromise—" Morrison raised his hand, cutting off the objection. "Your concerns are noted, Rodriguez, but this comes from the top. Lieutenant Chen has capabilities we need for this operation." Chief Petty Officer David Park, the team's communications specialist, leaned forward. His Korean-American features remained impassive, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. "What kind of capabilities, sir?" Morrison gestured for Sarah to step forward. She moved with purpose, though her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't her first time being the only woman in a room full of warriors, but it was the first time the stakes felt this high. "Lieutenant Chen," Morrison said, "brief the team on your background." Sarah cleared her throat and began. "I hold advanced degrees in applied linguistics and Middle Eastern studies from Georgetown. I've served as a cultural advisor in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I'm fluent in Arabic, Farsi, Pashto, and Urdu, with conversational ability in 3 additional dialects. I've also completed advanced combat training and urban warfare certification." Seaman Jake Stevens, barely 25 but already a veteran of numerous operations, snorted quietly. "Paper qualifications," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Morrison's eyes snapped to Stevens like a laser sight finding its target. "You have something to add, Stevens?" Stevens straightened. "No, sir. Just wondering how book learning translates to real-world application under fire." Sarah had heard variations of this challenge countless times. She met Stevens's gaze directly. 3 months ago in Kandahar, I spent 18 hours embedded with local tribal leaders, negotiating the release of 4 captured contractors. The Taliban had them in a compound surrounded by civilians. My book learning prevented what would have been a bloodbath and got our people home alive. The room's dynamic shifted slightly. Sergeant First Class Tony Kowalski, the team medic, nodded with grudging respect. "Kandahar's no joke. What extraction team were you with?" "I wasn't with an extraction team," Sarah replied. "I went in alone." Now she had their attention. Morrison continued the briefing. Operation Silent Thunder targets a high-value asset believed to be coordinating terrorist activities from a compound in the Coast Province. Intelligence suggests he's planning something significant for the anniversary of 9/11. We have a narrow window to neutralize the threat. Morrison activated the projection system, and satellite images filled the screen. The compound looked like a fortress: high walls, multiple buildings, strategic positioning on elevated terrain. The target is Hashim al-Mansouri, a former intelligence officer who's been off our radar for 3 years. He's smart, paranoid, and has managed to stay alive by being unpredictable. Chief Park studied the images. Security looks tight. Multiple escape routes. This guy knows we're coming. Morrison nodded. Which is why we need Lieutenant Chen. Al-Mansouri has a weakness. He's been seeking a particular artifact, a medieval manuscript that supposedly contains strategic secrets. Our intelligence suggests he'll meet with someone who claims to have it. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. You want me to pose as the seller? Exactly. Your cover will be Dr. Sarah Hassan, an antiquities dealer with connections to Syrian refugees who've smuggled artifacts out of the country. You'll arrange a meeting with al-Mansouri under the pretense of selling him the manuscript. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. And while she's having tea and discussing ancient books, we do what exactly? Morrison's smile was cold. You provide overwatch and extraction, but this isn't a traditional raid. If we go in guns blazing, al-Mansouri's network melts away and we're back to square one. Lieutenant Chen gets us inside his security perimeter peacefully. Once she confirms his identity and location, we move. Stevens spoke up again. What happens when he realizes the manuscript is fake? Sarah answered before Morrison could. It won't be fake. We have a 13th century text on military strategy that matches what he's looking for. It's valuable enough to be credible, but not so rare that its loss would be culturally significant. Kowalski whistled low. Someone did their homework. Morrison continued laying out the operational details. The compound was situated in a valley with limited approach routes. Al-Mansouri's security was reportedly excellent. Former military personnel who knew how to handle threats. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at 1400 hours local time. The challenge, Morrison explained, is that al-Mansouri will have his people search Lieutenant Chen thoroughly. She'll be carrying minimal equipment, no weapons, no communication devices that could be detected. She'll be on her own inside that compound. Chief Park frowned. How do we maintain communication? Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out what looked like an ordinary pen. Microtransmitter. The casing is ceramic and carbon fiber. It won't trigger metal detectors, and the signal is encrypted on a frequency that appears to be normal background radio noise. She clicked the pen, and a nearly inaudible tone filled the room. Range is about 2 kilometers in ideal conditions. Less in mountainous terrain, but enough for overwatch positioning. Rodriguez examined the pen with professional interest. Impressive, but what about extraction? If things go sideways, how do we get you out? Morrison pulled up another satellite image showing the compound surroundings. Overwatch positions here, here, and here, he said, pointing to elevated positions around the valley. 3 teams of 4 with overlapping fields of fire. If Lieutenant Chen activates the emergency signal, we have multiple extraction routes planned. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering every detail from weather patterns to backup communication protocols. Sarah found herself impressed by the team's professionalism. Their initial skepticism was giving way to the kind of thorough planning that kept people alive in hostile territory. As the meeting wound down, Morrison addressed the room. Questions? Stevens raised his hand. Sir, no disrespect to Lieutenant Chen, but why not use an agency asset for this? Someone with deep cover experience? Morrison's expression became grave. Because 3 CIA operatives have already tried to infiltrate al-Mansouri's network. All 3 are dead. He's paranoid about Western intelligence, but he's not expecting a female academic. Lieutenant Chen's cover identity has been built over 6 months. She's published papers under her alias, established a reputation in antiquities circles. It's solid. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. 3 dead operatives. The stakes of this mission were becoming clearer. Rodriguez spoke next. What's our rules of engagement? Standard ROE with 1 modification, Morrison replied. Priority 1 is Lieutenant Chen's safety. Priority 2 is the mission objective. We don't take unnecessary risks. Chief Park looked at Sarah directly. Lieutenant, have you ever been in combat? Yes, she replied simply. Twice in Iraq, once in Syria. I'm not a door kicker, but I can handle myself. Kowalski asked the question they were all thinking. What makes you think Al-Mansouri won't see through your cover? Sarah had been waiting for this question. Because I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I really am an expert in medieval manuscripts. I really do have connections in the antiquities trade. The only thing that's false is my motivation for selling. Al-Mansouri will be suspicious, but he'll be looking for the wrong things. Morrison checked his watch. All right, people. We deploy in 36 hours. Use the time to prep gear and get some rest. Lieutenant Chen, you'll need to review the cultural briefing materials and practice your cover story with the intelligence team. As the group began to disperse, Stevens approached Sarah. Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have questioned your qualifications. Sarah shook his hand. No apology necessary. You're looking out for your team. I respect that. Rodriguez joined them. For what it's worth, ma'am, the Kandahar story impressed me. Takes serious courage to go into Taliban territory alone. Thank you, but I wasn't really alone. I had good intelligence and people watching my back, just like this mission. Chief Park was gathering his notes when he paused. Lieutenant, one more question. What do you think our chances are? Sarah considered the question carefully. Honestly, if everything goes according to plan, pretty good. Al-Mansouri wants what I'm selling badly enough to take risks. The manuscript is authentic enough to pass inspection, and you guys are professionals. And if things don't go according to plan, Sarah met his gaze steadily. Then we improvise. But that's why we train, right? To handle the unexpected. As she walked back to her quarters that evening, Sarah reflected on what lay ahead. In 36 hours, she would be sitting across from one of the world's most wanted terrorists, pretending to sell him ancient secrets while a SEAL team waited in the shadows. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. 3 CIA operatives had died trying to get close to Al-Mansouri, but they had been trying to infiltrate his organization, to become trusted members of his inner circle. Sarah's approach was different. She would be a stranger, a businesswoman with something he wanted, in and out, fast and clean. The next day was a blur of preparation. Sarah spent hours with the cultural advisors, refining her cover story and practicing the mannerisms of Dr. Sarah Hassan. She memorized details about the manuscript, its history, and its supposed significance. She rehearsed responses to dozens of potential questions, preparing for every angle Al-Mansouri might pursue. The SEAL team ran through tactical drills, practicing coordination between overwatch positions and extraction routes. Sarah joined them for some of the exercises, learning their hand signals and emergency procedures. The integration wasn't seamless. Years of training together couldn't be replicated in hours, but it was functional. Morrison pulled her aside during one break. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Ready, Sarah replied. Nervous, but ready. Morrison nodded. Good. Nerves keep you sharp. Just remember, the moment anything feels wrong, you signal for extraction. Don't try to be a hero. Understood, sir? One more thing. The teams come around on you. They see you're not some desk jockey playing at being operational. But tomorrow, you'll be alone in there. Trust your instincts. As Sarah prepared for what might be her most dangerous assignment, she felt the familiar mixture of fear and anticipation that came before high-stakes operations. Tomorrow would test everything she had learned, everything she believed about herself. The manuscript was ready, her cover was solid, and the SEAL team was positioned to support her. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't forget Morrison's words. 3 operatives were already dead. Al-Mansouri hadn't survived this long by being careless. Tomorrow would prove whether her approach was brilliant or foolish. The sun set over Coronado as Sarah made final preparations for a mission that would either make her career or end her life. The morning air in Afghanistan carried the scent of dust and distant fires as Sarah adjusted her hijab for the final time. She sat in the back of a battered Toyota pickup truck, driven by Hamid, a local contact who believed he was helping an antiquities dealer meet a wealthy collector. The manuscript case rested on her lap, its leather surface worn smooth by years of handling. Inside lay a genuine 13th-century text on military tactics, valuable enough to convince even an expert. Through her earpiece, disguised as a hearing aid, she could hear the quiet chatter of the SEAL teams taking their positions. Morrison's voice came through clearly. Angel 1, Angel 2, and Angel 3 in position. Overwatch established. Phoenix, how copy? Sarah clicked her pen twice against the manuscript case, their agreed signal for acknowledgement. The ceramic pen felt heavier than it should, knowing it was her only lifeline to the outside world. Hamid navigated the winding mountain road with practiced ease, occasionally glancing at his passenger in the rearview mirror. Dr. Hassan, he said in accented English, you are certain about this meeting? Hashim al-Mansouri is not known for his patience with business partners who disappoint him. Sarah nodded, staying in character. I understand the risks, Hamid, but the manuscript I carry is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. If al-Mansouri is truly interested in historical military texts, this will satisfy him. What Hamid didn't know was that Sarah's Arabic was flawless, and she had caught his whispered conversation with the compound security chief earlier that morning. Al-Mansouri was indeed expecting her, but his men had orders to search her thoroughly and watch for any sign of deception. The terrorist leader had survived this long by trusting no one completely. The compound appeared ahead as they rounded a bend in the road. Sarah's breath caught slightly. The satellite images hadn't fully captured the fortress-like nature of the structure. High concrete walls topped with razor wire surrounded a cluster of buildings, with armed guards visible at regular intervals. 2 technical vehicles, pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, flanked the main entrance. Chief Park's voice crackled in her earpiece. Phoenix, we have visual on your approach. Count 12 tangos on the perimeter, probably more inside. Angel 2 has eyes on the main building. Sarah clicked her pen once in acknowledgement as their truck approached the checkpoint. 3 men emerged from a guard shack, their AK-47s held casually but ready. The leader, a bearded man in his 40s wearing a mixture of military fatigues and civilian clothes, approached Hamid's window. Papers, he demanded in Arabic, though Sarah pretended not to understand. Hamid provided identification for both himself and Sarah, along with a letter of introduction that had been carefully forged by the intelligence team. The guard scrutinized the documents while his companions observed Sarah with undisguised curiosity. Female visitors were clearly unusual. After several tense minutes, the guard handed back their papers and waved them through. As they drove into the compound, Sarah mentally cataloged everything she saw. Vehicle positions, building layouts, guard rotations, details that could be crucial if extraction became necessary. The truck stopped in front of the main building, a 2-story structure that dominated the compound's center. Immediately, 4 more men approached. Their leader, a younger man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, addressed Sarah directly in Arabic. Dr. Hassan, I am Kareem, assistant to Mr. Al-Mansouri. You must understand security is paramount here. We will need to search your belongings and person before the meeting can proceed. Sarah responded in accented but competent Arabic, playing her role as an academic who had learned the language for business purposes rather than intelligence work. Of course, I expected as much when dealing with someone of Mr. Al-Mansouri's reputation. Kareem smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. If you would accompany me. Sarah was led into a side room where two women waited, clearly brought in specifically for this purpose. The search was thorough but professional. They examined every inch of the manuscript case, using magnifying glasses to check for hidden compartments. The ceramic pen passed inspection, appearing to be exactly what it seemed. When the search concluded, Kareem returned. Mr. Al-Mansouri will see you now. Please follow me. Rodriguez's voice whispered through her earpiece. Phoenix, you're moving to the main building. We're tracking your position. The interior of the building was surprisingly well appointed. Rich carpets covered polished wooden floors, and the walls displayed an eclectic mixture of weapons, maps, and Islamic calligraphy. Sarah was led up a curved staircase to the second floor, where ornate double doors opened into what could only be described as a war room. Maps covered 3 of the 4 walls, marked with pins, colored strings, and handwritten notes in multiple languages. Computer screens displayed what appeared to be news feeds from around the world. And behind an imposing wooden desk sat Hashim Al-Mansouri himself. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, perhaps 5'8", with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. His manner of dress was refined, a well-tailored shirt and expensive watch that spoke of significant resources. But there was something in his posture, a coiled readiness that reminded Sarah of the predators she'd studied in behavioral psychology. Dr. Hassan, Al-Mansouri said, rising to greet her. His English was accented but precise. Please sit. Kareem tells me you have something that might interest me. Sarah took the offered chair, placing the manuscript case on the small table between them. Mr. Al-Mansouri, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I believe I have exactly what you're looking for. Al-Mansouri's eyes fixed on the case with unmistakable hunger. The manuscript of Ibn Sina on military strategy? You're certain of its authenticity? Absolutely. Carbon dating confirms it's from the 13th century, and the calligraphy matches known examples of the period. More importantly, the content is exactly as described in the historical records, tactical principles that influenced military thinking for generations. As Sarah opened the case and carefully removed the manuscript, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. 2 more men had entered the room quietly, positioning themselves near the door. Al-Mansouri noticed her glance and smiled. Forgive the security, Doctor. My work requires constant vigilance. Too many people would prefer me dead. Sarah nodded understandingly, while internally noting the additional threats. In my business, I deal with many collectors who value discretion. I understand the need for caution. Al-Mansouri leaned forward as Sarah displayed the manuscript. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in flowing Arabic script that spoke of battles fought 800 years ago. His knowledge was clearly extensive. He asked detailed questions about specific passages, testing both the document's authenticity and Sarah's expertise. For 30 minutes, they discussed the manuscript's contents. Sarah found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation. Al-Mansouri was clearly intelligent and well-educated, with a deep appreciation for historical military strategy. Under different circumstances, it might have been an enjoyable academic discussion. Morrison's voice buzzed quietly in her earpiece. Phoenix, 30 minutes elapsed. How's our timeline? Sarah clicked her pen against her water glass, the sound barely audible but clear enough for the transmitter to pick up. 3 clicks, proceeding as planned. Al-Mansouri finally leaned back in his chair. Dr. Hassan, I'm impressed. This manuscript is exactly as advertised. However, I must ask, why are you willing to sell it? Surely a scholar like yourself would prefer to see it in a museum or university collection. This was the moment Sarah had prepared for most carefully. Her answer had to be believable while maintaining her cover. Mr. Al-Mansouri, I wish the world were that simple. But my family in Syria lost everything when the war began. My younger brother needs surgery that we cannot afford. Sometimes principles must yield to necessity. The lie came easily, supported by months of careful character development. Dr. Sarah Hassan's fictional family situation had been designed to explain exactly this kind of moral compromise. Al-Mansouri studied her face intently. Sarah held his gaze, allowing just the right amount of discomfort to show. The shame of someone forced to sell cultural treasures for personal reasons. I understand such choices, Al-Mansouri said finally. War forces difficult decisions on all of us. Karim leaned over and whispered something in Al-Mansouri's ear. The terrorist leader nodded and turned back to Sarah. Dr. Hassan, the manuscript meets my expectations. However, I have one final test. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. Of course. Al-Mansouri stood and moved to one of the wall maps. You see, I have particular interest in the tactical principles discussed in Chapter 7 of the manuscript, the section on asymmetrical warfare in urban environments. Could you summarize those principles for me? Relief flooded through Sarah. This was exactly the kind of question she'd hoped for, one that tested her knowledge rather than her cover story. She had memorized every page of the manuscript during her preparation. Chapter 7 discusses the use of terrain advantage when facing superior forces, she began. Ibn Sina writes about channeling enemy movements through predetermined routes, using civilian populations for concealment, and the importance of multiple escape routes. He specifically mentions the tactic of appearing weak in one area while concentrating forces elsewhere. Al-Mansouri nodded approvingly. And what does he say about timing? That patience is a weapon more powerful than gunpowder, that the wise commander waits for his enemy to make mistakes, rather than forcing action prematurely. Excellent. You clearly know the text well. Al-Mansouri returned to his seat. I'm prepared to make an offer. $300,000. Wire transfer to any account you specify. Sarah had been briefed to expect an offer in this range. She pretended to consider carefully before responding. Mr. Al-Mansouri, I appreciate your directness. 300,000 is acceptable. However, I would prefer payment in Swiss francs, deposited to an account in Geneva. That can be arranged. Karim will handle the details. Al-Mansouri signaled to his assistant, who began typing on a laptop. Stephen's voice came through her earpiece. Phoenix, we're tracking multiple vehicles approaching your location from the south. Might be routine, but heads up. Sarah clicked her pen twice against the table in acknowledgement, then addressed Al-Mansouri. How long will the transfer take to complete? Usually within the hour, he replied. Perhaps we could discuss your other acquisitions while we wait. I'm always interested in expanding my collection. This wasn't part of the plan. Sarah had expected to conclude the business quickly and leave. An extended conversation increased the risk of exposure, but refusing might seem suspicious. I have some interesting pieces, she said carefully. A 14th century map of trade routes, some Ottoman military correspondence, nothing as significant as the Ibn Sina manuscript, but historically valuable. As they talked, Sarah became aware of increased activity outside. Through the window, she could see men moving with purpose across the compound. Something had changed. Chief Park's voice confirmed her concern. Phoenix, we count 6 additional vehicles now inside the compound. This looks like either a planned meeting or they're responding to a threat. Al-Mansouri seemed to notice her distraction. Is something troubling you, Dr. Hassan? Not at all. I was just admiring your security arrangements. Very thorough. Al-Mansouri smiled. In my position, paranoia is not a character flaw. It's a survival trait. But please, don't be concerned. My men are simply conducting routine security sweeps. Karim looked up from his laptop. Sir, there's been a slight delay with the banking network. The transfer may take an additional 30 minutes. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. Banking delays were possible, but the timing seemed convenient. She clicked her pen 3 times rapidly, the signal for potential trouble. Morrison's voice came immediately. Phoenix, we copy. Angel teams report no hostile activity toward your position. Do you need extraction? Sarah managed a frustrated sigh. Banking systems, she said to Al-Mansouri, always unreliable when you need them most. I apologize for the inconvenience. Perhaps some tea while we wait? Al-Mansouri gestured to one of his men who disappeared through a side door. The next few minutes passed in polite conversation about art and antiquities, but Sarah could sense undercurrents of tension in the room. Al-Mansouri's men seemed more alert, and she caught several whispered conversations in Pashto, a language she understood but wasn't supposed to. The tea arrived, served in delicate china cups that seemed out of place in the military atmosphere. Sarah accepted hers gratefully, using the opportunity to scan the room more thoroughly. Emergency exits, weapon positions, potential improvised weapons. Her training took over even as she maintained polite conversation. Rodriguez's voice crackled in her earpiece. Phoenix, Angel 2 reports movement on the northern perimeter. Looks like they're setting up defensive positions. Something was definitely wrong. Either Al-Mansouri was expecting trouble, or he suspected Sarah's true identity. She needed to conclude this transaction and extract before the situation deteriorated further. Mr. Al-Mansouri, she said, I'm somewhat concerned about the delay. I have another appointment this evening in Kabul, and the drive is quite long. Al-Mansouri set down his teacup and regarded her thoughtfully. Dr. Hassan, may I ask you something directly? Of course. In your academic work, have you ever encountered intelligence officers posing as scholars? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow, but her training held. She managed a confused laugh. Intelligence officers? You mean like spies? I'm afraid my world is much more mundane than that, though I suppose in my business one learns to be suspicious of provenance and authenticity. Al-Mansouri nodded slowly. Yes, authenticity is crucial. In manuscripts, in people, in partnerships. Kowalski's voice whispered urgently. Phoenix, multiple targets moving toward your building. This doesn't look routine. Sarah realized she was running out of time. Whatever Al-Mansouri suspected, the situation was escalating beyond her control. She needed to either complete the transaction immediately or signal for extraction. Perhaps, she said carefully, we could expedite the payment through alternative means? I have some flexibility in my arrangements if it would speed things along. Al-Mansouri studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Dr. Hassan, I believe we understand each other perfectly. Karim, please complete the transfer immediately. His assistant's fingers flew over the keyboard. Within minutes, he looked up. Transfer completed, sir. 300,000 Swiss francs deposited to the Geneva account. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued tension. The transaction was complete, but she still needed to extract safely. Excellent. Thank you for your business, Mr. Al-Mansouri. I hope the manuscript serves your purposes well. I'm certain it will. Al-Mansouri stood and extended his hand. Dr. Hassan, it has been a genuine pleasure. Perhaps we can do business again in the future. Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested combat experience despite his refined appearance. I would welcome that opportunity. As they prepared to leave, Morrison's voice came through her earpiece. Phoenix, we have eyes on your exit route. Recommend immediate extraction upon leaving the compound. Sarah gathered her now empty manuscript case and followed Kareem toward the door. But as they reached it, Al-Mansouri spoke again. Dr. Hassan, one final question. The Ibn Sina manuscript mentions a specific battle formation called the Eagle's Claw. Could you describe it for me? Sarah's blood ran cold. There was no Eagle's Claw formation mentioned anywhere in the manuscript. This was a test, and she had just failed it. The room fell silent as Al-Mansouri watched her reaction. His smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold as winter stone. In that moment, Sarah realized that the most dangerous part of her mission was just beginning. The silence in the room stretched like a taut wire as Sarah stared into Al-Mansouri's calculating eyes. Her mind raced through options, but each path led to the same conclusion. Her cover was blown, and she was trapped in a fortress surrounded by armed terrorists. The manuscript case felt suddenly heavy in her hands, no longer a prop, but a potential weapon. The Eagle's Claw formation, she repeated slowly, buying herself precious seconds to think. I'm afraid I don't recall that specific reference. Could you tell me which section you're thinking of? Al-Mansouri's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Dr. Hassan, there is no such formation mentioned in the manuscript. I had it studied quite thoroughly before agreeing to this meeting. The pretense crumbled away like a house of cards. Around the room, Al-Mansouri's men tensed, hands moving closer to their weapons. Sarah could see Kareem's finger hovering near his sidearm. Morrison's voice crackled urgently in her earpiece. Phoenix, your vitals just spiked. What's your status? Sarah clicked her pen 4 times rapidly against the manuscript case, the emergency extraction signal. Then she looked Al-Mansouri directly in the eye. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said calmly. Perhaps we could... Enough. Al-Mansouri's voice cut through her words like a blade. You are very good. I'll give you that. The accent, the knowledge, the documentation, all quite convincing. But you made one crucial mistake. Which was? You knew too much about the manuscript. A real antiquities dealer would have focused on provenance and monetary value. Only an intelligence analyst would have memorized tactical details with such precision. Al-Mansouri moved around the desk, positioning himself between Sarah and the door. The question now is which intelligence service sent you? Rodriguez's voice whispered in her earpiece. Phoenix, Angel teams moving to assault positions, 60 seconds to breach. Sarah knew she had to buy time for her extraction team. Every second counted now. Mr. Al-Mansouri, I think you're being paranoid. I'm exactly who I claim to be. Really? Then you won't mind waiting here while my people contact some associates in the antiquities trade. I'm sure they can verify Dr. Sarah Hassan's reputation. That was exactly what Sarah couldn't allow. Her cover identity would hold up to casual scrutiny, but detailed investigation by professionals would expose the deception within hours. Actually, she said, I do mind. I have other appointments, and frankly, your accusations are insulting. She stood up abruptly and took a step toward the door. Kareem immediately moved to block her path, his hand now resting on his pistol grip. I'm afraid I must insist, Al-Mansouri said. You understand. Security concerns and all that. Chief Park's voice came through clearly. Phoenix, 30 seconds to breach. Get down when you hear the flashbangs. Sarah realized she needed to create some kind of distraction or advantage before the assault began. The manuscript case was her only potential weapon, but she was outnumbered 6-1 in a room with no cover. Very well, she said, setting the case down on the table. If you insist on verification, perhaps you'd like to examine the manuscript more closely. There are some markings I didn't mention earlier. Al-Mansouri's curiosity overcame his caution. He moved closer to the table as Sarah opened the case. "What kind of markings?" "Here," Sarah said, pointing to a passage on one of the pages. As Al-Mansuri leaned over to look, she grabbed the heavy brass corner of the manuscript case and swung it upward with all her strength. The corner caught Al-Mansuri in the temple with a sickening crack. He staggered backward, blood flowing from the gash in his head. Kareem shouted in Arabic and reached for his weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She dove behind Al-Mansuri's heavy wooden desk just as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Wood splintered above her head as bullets chewed through the furniture. The room erupted in chaos as Al-Mansuri's men opened fire without clear targets, hitting walls, maps, and each other in their confusion. The first explosion came from somewhere below, a flashbang grenade that rattled the windows and sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Then came the distinctive crack of breaching charges as the SEAL teams blasted their way into the compound. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Phoenix, we're coming up the stairs. Stay down." Sarah pressed herself against the floor as the firefight intensified. Through the desk's modesty panel, she could see Kareem barking orders while blood streamed down Al-Mansuri's face. The terrorist leader was dazed but still conscious, trying to coordinate his men's response to the assault. Another explosion shook the building, this one much closer. The double doors to the room burst inward in a shower of splinters and smoke. Through the haze, Sarah saw the familiar silhouettes of the SEAL team advancing with textbook precision. Rodriguez appeared first, his assault rifle tracking smoothly across the room. He put 2 rounds center mass into one of Al-Mansuri's bodyguards before the man could bring his AK-47 to bear. Stevens followed immediately, moving to cover the left side of the room. "Phoenix, sound off!" Morrison's voice called out. "Behind the desk!" Sarah shouted back. "Al-Mansuri is wounded but mobile. At least 4 hostiles still active." Chief Park materialized beside the desk, his weapon covering the approaches while he checked Sarah for injuries. "You hit?" "Negative, but we need Al-Mansuri alive if possible." "Copy that." The firefight was brief but intense. Al-Mansuri's men were competent fighters, but they were caught off guard and outgunned. Kowalski appeared in the doorway, his medical kit already in hand as he scanned for wounded teammates. Within 90 seconds of the breach, the room was secured. 3 of Al-Mansuri's men were dead, 1 was wounded, and Kareem had surrendered when Stevens put a rifle barrel against his head. Al-Mansuri himself sat slumped against the wall, holding a bloody cloth to his temple, while Morrison zip-tied his hands. "Phoenix," Morrison said, "you did good. How'd you know to signal extraction?" Sarah stood up slowly, brushing dust and splinters from her clothes. "He tested me with information that wasn't in the manuscript. I knew the jig was up." Rodriguez examined the brass corner of the manuscript case, now dented and stained with blood. "Nice improvised weapon. Looks like you rang his bell pretty good." Al-Mansuri looked up at Sarah through pain-clouded eyes. You're not just an intelligence analyst, are you?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "No, I'm not." Morrison activated his radio. "Control, this is Bravo 6. Package secured, requesting immediate extraction." The voice that came back was tense. "Bravo 6, be advised. Multiple hostile vehicles converging on your position. Estimate 15 minutes to contact." Stevens moved to the window and peered through the shattered glass. "Boss, we've got problems. Looks like reinforcements coming up the Valley Road. Convoy of at least 6 vehicles." Morrison cursed quietly. The extraction plan had called for a fighting withdrawal to the landing zone, but that assumed they'd have time to reach it before enemy reinforcements arrived. Chief Park was already working his radio, coordinating with the Overwatch teams. "Angel 2, what's your count on the approaching hostiles?" "Angel 2 to Bravo 6. Count approximately 40 tangos in 6 vehicles. Mix of technical and transport. ETA to compound 12 minutes. Sarah looked around the devastated room. Maps still hung on the walls, and Al-Mansouri's computers remained intact despite the gunfire. "Commander, those computers might have intelligence value." Morrison nodded to Kowalski. "Grab what you can carry. Hard drives, documents, anything that looks important." As the medic worked to collect intelligence materials, Rodriguez called out from his position by the window, "Boss, they're setting up a perimeter. We're gonna have company on all sides soon." Morrison's tactical mind was already working through the problem. The compound was a fortress that worked both ways, easy to defend but hard to escape from. With reinforcements closing the noose, a conventional extraction was becoming impossible. "Change of plans," Morrison announced. "We hold here until extract assets can clear us a path out." Sarah found herself thinking about the tactical principles in the manuscript she'd been carrying. Ibn Sina had written about using defensive positions to channel enemy attacks, forcing them into predetermined killing zones. "Commander," she said, "what about the vehicles in the compound? Could we use them to break through the perimeter?" Stevens looked skeptical. "Ma'am, those technicals have mounted weapons. We'd be sitting ducks in their transport trucks." "Not the trucks," Sarah replied. "The fuel depot." She pointed toward the window where a cluster of fuel barrels was visible near the compound's maintenance area. "Create a diversion. Force them to react instead of surrounding us." Morrison followed her gaze and immediately understood. "Rodriguez, how much explosive do you have left?" "Enough to make those barrels very unhappy." "Do it. Chief, coordinate with the Angels. When that depot goes up, we move as a team toward the north wall." The plan came together with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez slipped out through a side exit to reach the fuel depot, while the rest of the team prepared for movement. Al-Mansouri and his captured assistant were secured for transport, though the terrorist leader would clearly slow them down. Kowalski had finished stuffing hard drives and documents into his pack. "Got what I could, boss. This guy kept good records." Morrison checked his watch. "Rodriguez, you in position?" "Affirmative. Charges set. Recommend you cover your ears. All teams, prepare for fireworks." The explosion, when it came, was magnificent. The fuel depot erupted in a pillar of flame and smoke that could be seen for miles. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition stores and additional fuel caught fire. The entire compound shook as if hit by an earthquake. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Move! Move! Move!" The SEAL team flowed out of the building like water, carrying their prisoners and maintaining formation despite the urgency. Sarah found herself in the middle of the group, protected but still armed with a pistol Stevens had given her. The explosion had the desired effect. Al-Mansouri's reinforcements were thrown into confusion as burning debris rained down on their positions. Some vehicles veered away from the flames, while others stopped to coordinate their response. But the enemy wasn't completely disorganized. As the SEAL team reached the compound's north wall, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions. The terrorists had recovered quickly and were trying to prevent their leader's escape. Chief Park called out contact reports as the team moved. "Multiple contacts north wall. Technical with mounted weapon at 2 o'clock. Morrison made rapid tactical decisions. Stevens, Kowalski, suppressing fire on that technical. Rodriguez, breach the wall. Chief, call in gun runs on the approaching convoy. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled violence. Rodriguez's breaching charge blew a hole in the concrete wall large enough for the team to pass through. Stevens and Kowalski's combined fire disabled the technical, though more enemy fighters were closing in from other directions. Sarah found herself pressed against the wall as bullets cracked overhead. This was nothing like the controlled environment of the manuscript exchange. This was raw combat, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. "Phoenix," Morrison called out. "You still with us?" "Roger," she shouted back, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. An enemy fighter appeared in the breach, his AK-47 sweeping for targets. Sarah didn't think. She simply reacted. Her pistol came up and she fired 3 shots center mass. The terrorist dropped without firing a shot. Rodriguez looked at her with new respect. "Nice shooting, ma'am." Through the breach they could see the valley beyond the compound, but they were still a long way from safety, and Al-Mansouri's reinforcements were closing in fast. Morrison's radio crackled. "Bravo 6, this is Reaper 1-1. I'm inbound with gun runs on your mark." "Reaper 1-1, we need immediate fire support on the approaching convoy. Danger close." The sound of the A-10 Warthog's GAU-8 cannon was like nothing else on Earth, a thunderous roar that could be felt as much as heard. The approaching convoy disappeared in explosions and smoke as the aircraft made its gun run. "Path is clear," Morrison announced. "Moving to extract LZ." The team bounded through the breach and into the rocky terrain beyond the compound. Al-Mansouri, weakened by his head injury, stumbled frequently and had to be half-carried by Kowalski. The pace was necessarily slow, and enemy forces were still pursuing. Sarah found herself thinking about the irony of the situation. She had come to Afghanistan to prove herself to this SEAL team, and now she was running for her life alongside them, covered in dust and blood, carrying intelligence that might prevent future attacks. Stevens called out from the rear guard. "Multiple contacts pursuing. They're not giving up." Morrison checked their position against his GPS. "LZ is 800 meters. Chief, where's our ride?" "Inbound now, boss. 2 minutes out." The sound of rotor blades filled the air as 2 Black Hawk helicopters approached the landing zone. But the enemy wasn't finished yet. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked through the air, forcing the helicopters to take evasive action. "They've got RPGs!" Rodriguez shouted. "Halos can't land under fire!" Sarah looked back at the pursuing forces, then at the circling helicopters. The enemy had positioned themselves well. Any attempt to land would expose the aircraft to devastating fire. "Commander," she said, "what about suppressive fire from multiple angles? If we split into 2 groups, we could create crossing fields of fire." Morrison considered the suggestion quickly. In the conventional world of military tactics, dividing forces in the face of superior numbers was usually suicide. But sometimes unconventional thinking was exactly what a situation required. "Do it," he decided. "Stevens, Rodriguez, take the high ground to the east. Rest of us will provide covering fire from the rocks." The plan worked perfectly. Caught between 2 firing positions, Al-Mansouri's men were forced to take cover instead of advancing. The suppressive fire was enough to allow the helicopters to land and begin loading the team. As Sarah ran toward the nearest Black Hawk, she could hear Morrison coordinating the extraction. "Load the prisoners first. Intel materials next." She found herself pushed aboard the helicopter with Al-Mansouri and Kareem, both still zip-tied and looking stunned by the rapid turn of events. The captured terrorist leader stared at her as the aircraft lifted off. "Who are you, really?" he asked in Arabic. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Someone who just stopped your next attack." The flight back to base was quieter than the extraction, but the adrenaline was still coursing through Sarah's system. She watched the Afghan landscape pass below, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few hours. Morrison appeared beside her seat. "Hell of a first mission with the team." "Thank you, sir. Though I'm not sure mission is the right word for what just happened." Morrison smiled. "That's exactly what it was. Mission planning, execution, adaptation when things went sideways, and successful extraction. Plus, you got us the intelligence we came for and took down a major terror facilitator." Rodriguez leaned over from across the cabin. "Ma'am, that improvised weapon work with the manuscript case? That was solid thinking." "Yeah," Stevens added, "and your tactical suggestions during the extract saved our asses. You've got good instincts." Chief Park nodded his agreement. "Takes serious courage to stay calm under fire like that, especially on your first combat operation with an unfamiliar unit." Sarah looked around at the faces of the men who had initially questioned her presence on the team. The skepticism was gone, replaced by the kind of professional respect that had to be earned through shared danger. Kowalski held up one of the hard drives they'd recovered. "Intel boys are going to love this stuff. Financial records, operational plans, contact lists. This could roll up half his network." "What about Al-Mansouri himself?" Sarah asked. Morrison's expression grew grim. "That'll depend on what the interrogators can get out of him. But thanks to you, we've got him and his intelligence alive. That's more than anyone expected when this operation started." As the helicopters approached the base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. She had walked into that compound as an outsider trying to prove herself. She was returning as a member of the team, blooded in combat and trusted with their lives. The landing was smooth, and as the team disembarked, Morrison pulled Sarah aside. "Lieutenant, I owe you an apology. When this mission started, I had my doubts about bringing you along. I was wrong." "Thank you, sir. But honestly, I had doubts too. This was way outside my comfort zone." Morrison smiled. "The best operations usually are, but you handled yourself like a professional. If you ever want to cross-train with special operations, I'd be happy to put in a recommendation." As Sarah walked across the tarmac toward the debriefing rooms, she could hear Rodriguez telling the other team members about her shot through the breach. "Center mass, 3 rounds, like she'd been doing it her whole career." Stevens laughed. "Remind me never to underestimate the intel types again." It would be hours before the debriefing was complete and days before the full intelligence value of the operation was assessed. But Sarah already knew that something fundamental had changed. She had proven to herself, and to one of the Navy's most elite teams, that courage and competence could bridge any gap. The manuscript was gone, destroyed in the compound's fires. But the real treasure had been discovered in that room overlooking the Afghan valley, the moment when a SEAL team realized that their newest member wasn't just along for the ride, she was one of them. And that was a story worth telling.